I bet you're wondering why I call this orange. Well, I did the 7 big paintings that are in the gallery from October 2020 until the end of January 2021. During those 3.5 months, I went every single day into the studio, 5 days a week, and either I started it or the painting talked back to me what it needed, but I worked solidly. When I was all done, my daughter Jan went down to the studio. She said, "Mom, you have orange in every single painting." And I didn't realize it. And she said, "You should call the show Orange." So I thought about what orange is, and it's a warm and radiant, a positive energy color. And I guess subconsciously, while I was so happy painting away in my home and not able to see many people, don't forget it was pre-vaccination time, I thought, I guess that's a good idea because the end result is a very happy bit of joy that's coming out of these paintings. And then I listened to a program on Beethoven. Between 1822 and 1824, he wrote the Ninth Symphony. At that time, Austria was in the process of expanding. They wanted more territory, and it was upsetting the people very, very much. They were really down and out, and they were full of despair. And he wanted to show camaraderie with them. So he put in the Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy. It's very famous. He did it consciously to uplift the people. I did it unconsciously to uplift the people. I could never have done these paintings early in my career. And the reason is that these paintings are a culmination of power, of color, of good design, and also free. I might have used these elements earlier on, but never all together. So for me, it was very exciting. And what I wanted to do was to show you how I evolved to the point of being an artist. And although I've been a professional since I moved here in 1960, so it's 61 and a half years at this point, I started when I was in elementary school. I was always being asked to do special kind of artwork. Started in first grade. The teacher asked, "How many people know how to draw a girl?" 7 people raised their hand. "How many people know how to draw a boy?" Me. So I was chosen to draw the boy, and one of the other girls ended up drawing the girl, and we went to another first grade, and I was so annoyed because I wanted to draw a girl. In 6th grade, there was a field day, and I'm a big on being into sports and games, loved it, especially at camp. And turns out that I was stuck in the art room doing the band poster because no one else in the whole school could do it. So it took the whole field day time for me to finish it. We jumped to junior high. I did a paint, the size of a painting 3x4, but in actuality it was just a poster of lettering. And the lettering was very detailed. And what do you think I had to say? It was instructions what to do in case of an atom bomb attack. Can you imagine? We get to high school, and by high school, I was mainly doing posters. The art department wasn't too swift. And I did it with a very talented young man who ended up, I guess as a graphic designer, but he and I together were on the president's cabinet, and we did environments, I'd call them, at 3 different points at White Plains High School. And every time there was a sporting event or dance or fest affair or whatever, it was all advertised in these special places. And you'd think I would have applied to art school. No way. My father had been an immigrant's son, and he had to go into the business right away, but he went to night school at NYU. He made sure that his children were going to get a great education. My brother went to Yale and Harvard Business School, and his daughter better go to the facsimile, which were one of the 7 conference colleges. So I went to Vassar, and all my friends went there. Not just to Vassar, but to any of these 7 conference schools. Girls at that point were not allowed in Ivy League, and so this was our alternative. When I got to Vassar, I was allowed 1 credit in studio art freshman year, 2 credits sophomore year, which equal 1 course, and I knew I was in the wrong place. I guess it wasn't until I was deprived of art that I needed it so much. And I realized it was the only course I was getting a solid A in. So I went to my father and I said, I'm in the wrong place. He says, you're going to stay there 2 years. You'll get all your academics, and then last 2 years you can get your art. Okay. At that time in the summer, I was working at a camp, and I was head of the arts and crafts, and I loved teaching these young kids, and I said, well, I'll be practical, I'll get an art education degree. There were only 4 schools in New York State that had that program, and 3 of them, I would have to go to summer school, but Skidmore did not have that requirement because I had already fulfilled all my academics, and it fit in very well with their program. So I was very fortunate and could work at camp all the time. So I get up to Skidmore, and I was absolutely in heaven. It was the old campus. We were integrated with the town, and I wasn't in what we call an ivory tower campus. When I had been in Vassar sophomore year, they had hired an artist from South Norwalk who was very well known. He was a woodcut printer. His name was Antonio Frisconi. Antonio brought in about 50 of his works, and he put them all around the studio, and I would say they were about 15 inches by 20 inches. I never looked at the subject. I never looked at the design. I only said to myself, someday I'm going to have the time to do this much work. And so I went to Skidmore, and senior year, we had to choose a final project in one particular medium. Well, I decided to do color wood blocks. So I called up Antonio Frisconi, and I said, I'd like to learn how to do this. He said, come on up to South Norwalk. And he quickly taught me how to do it. And then he said, I'm now going to give you 4 suggestions if you really want to be a good artist. The first one is, don't get married. I said, what are you talking about? I'm getting married a week after graduation. He said, all right, if you're going to get married, don't have kids. I said, what do you mean I don't have kids? Of course we're going to have children. We talked about it. He said, all right, if you're going to be married and have kids, you have to still have an obligation to develop yourself as a human being. And you do this by going to the best theater, read the best books, hear the best music, go to the best dance, and see the best film, particularly arty films. And I can honestly say to you that during my lifetime, I have done that. When the kids were young and napping, and then I had a sitter for 50 cents an hour for 2 hours, 5 days a week. I had a time of 20 hours in which to enrich myself and to do some artwork. And I'd take all the works of James Baldwin, Tolstoy, and so forth, and I'd read it all so that I was growing. When I got a little older, we then went into the kids could have a babysitter for longer. I ended up going in for dance, nonstop dance, and seeing all the arty movies possible. When I was in the art studio, turned on all the classical music with a little bit of Marvin Gaye on the side, and I always tried to uplift it. We went to plays much more often. We weren't able to do it too much in the last few years. And so I grew. The fourth thing that he said to me was that an artist is 90% work and only 10% talent. Well, what does that mean exactly? It means it doesn't really matter how much you are talented unless you evolve with your work, you will never grow. Well, we then, after Skidmore, I got an outstanding job, and I was the high school teacher at Horace Greeley High School in Chappaqua. And my high school seniors were 5 years younger than me. And just to give you an idea of what went on in my classroom, I'll tell you what happened about midway. I realized that these seniors didn't know anything about art history, and I was going to take 1 month and give them a quick survey. So when I got to the Renaissance, I did a little bit of Donatello and, of course, Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. But it was the next day that I had the whole day for Michelangelo. Now, this was the time that Eisenhower was running for president, and he had a motto, I like Ike. Well, the reason why I loved Michelangelo was that he seemed to use the maximum of his ability in the time that he had in life, in his 88 plus years or so. And I was a great admirer of him. The way he drew, the way he sculpted, the way he chose his marble, everything about him. The next day, I come to class, there is no one there. And I said, I'm 22, I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble. So they ended up, the door opens, and in walks my class with banners across their chests saying, I like Mike. And that kind of energy and fun is what I was able to give to them. We went down to the Metropolitan Museum and drew the sculptures of Malol and Rodin before a lot of it was sent to Israel in the Billy Rose collection. Well, at the end of the year, I said to my husband, I think I have to give up this job. The kids are improving and I'm not. And if I'm not, I'm always going to give an excuse. I'm going to be able to start my career before I have children. So he was in agreement, as he was in agreement with almost anything that I did. He was so supportive, so wonderful. And he was about to start his whole new career in life insurance and financial planning. So we decided we're going to move to Connecticut. But the first step was to tell my parents. We didn't ask my parents, we told my parents. And the only thing that they to me was, what? You're giving up $5,000 a year salary next year? Well, that was what it was. So we moved to Connecticut and we moved to Westport. Why Westport? Because my husband was a golfer and Longshore Club was just bought and it was discussed in the New York Times Magazine. And he said, if we go there, I'll be able to play golf at a reasonable price. So that was one thing. The second thing was an arts community. At the time, there was the arts, they had it downtown. It was a professional group of illustrators. And they had a program of teaching art through the mail. It was absolutely an antithesis of what I learned at art education at Skidmore. But it really didn't matter because I found myself being invited, before I knew it, to small little art shows for liberal causes. And this was not just for liberal candidates, but for the civil rights movement and for anti-war particularly. And there I met 3 other mentors. The first one was Tracy Sugarman. Tracy Sugarman graduated from Syracuse and immediately had to go to war. And his job was to bring supplies from England to Omaha Beach in Normandy. And every time he went back to England, he would do sketches of the sailors and the soldiers there, and he'd send them back to his wife. And when he returned after the war, she wanted to show him again all these sketches. He said, I don't want to see them, just put them up in the attic. 50 years go by, and they took them out of the attic, and they made a book. It's pretty amazing. He also did a lot of civil rights work going down to the South, and he wrote books. And in addition, he did all of the children's wing in the Norwalk Hospital with illustrations that are delightful. The second mentor was Stanley Bleifeld, a sculptor from Weston. I own several of his pieces. And he also started teaching school, but gave it up for sculptor. And he did the Civil Rights Memorial in Richmond, Virginia, and the Navy Memorial for the Department of the Navy on Pennsylvania Avenue. He was a marvelous, marvelous craftsman and sculptor. And the third person was Leonard Everett Fisher, who just had a show here. He's 97 plus, and he was a cartologist in World War II, and his map making of detail was so important. And from that experience, he began to draw the human body a lot, did many, many books and paintings, and he taught in New Haven at the Pear School of Art. And all these 3 guys constantly met me and said, what are you doing now? What can I do to help you? They were about 13 to 17 years older than me. So I started to work. But in 1961, I had my first child. And I didn't have a car, because Chuck had our one car. So I was busy getting stimulation from news reports and also the newspaper. And then in March 1963, I did the Birmingham series. Now, that's when Bull Connor of Birmingham, the sheriff, brought high-pressure hoses and also very vicious dogs and attacked the black people, who we called Negroes at the time. By then, I had sort of given up the printing and just was interested in the blocks. So I already had in my home 3 blocks of wood that were weathering, or what I'd call simmering, getting back to see if they're going to warp or not. The first one is the middle one, Violence to the Blacks. The second one on the right here is the Martin Luther King approach, What Shall We Do, of prayer. And the third was a realization we have to fight back. Now, as an artist, I could only use fists to explain that, but obviously he didn't use fists. He was nonviolent. So 2 years later, I gave birth to my daughter, and a month after that, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at Temple Israel in Westport. The rabbi's wife called me and said, bring over all your social commentary. I want him to see what you've done. And I brought over paintings and these wood carvings. And Sue Rubenstein said that he was going to have Sabbath dinner there, and I told her, tell him he can have anything he wanted, and I'd send him down. So he chose the Birmingham pieces, and he met us, Chuck and I, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes after he spoke. Of course, his speech was beyond belief, his presentation amazing, and his words. And he invited us down to Atlanta to see them at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. 2 years later, when I'm 29, in that picture, with dark hair, total dark, we went there on our way back from Florida, and we go to the office, and the offices were very tiny, and I didn't see any of the wood carvings. And I was told by the white PR person who met me and Chuck that, oh, Coretta King has already been in here, and she said, you can't put one in Andrew Young's office, one in Ralph Abernathy's office, and one in Martin's office. They must be together, because together they are powerful. So she brought them to their small home. It wasn't too big, right at the entrance of their house. She said, it's in this house that I can have 25 people, where the conference group made all their plans and raised all their money, so it's appropriate that they be here. So we went and met Dr. King again a second time. He had just come back from Chicago. He was very depressed because SNCC Association, which was a student nonviolent association, was getting more and more strength, and Dr. King felt it would take away from nonviolence. When we left that day, we felt we had really had one of the great experiences of our life. So time went by. I read that Coretta King had left the house at 2007, but didn't die until 2009. Andrew Young, who came 2 years ago again to Temple Israel, told me the story. She was reading in bed in 2007 when a young man came in to steal from their house. And she calls up Andrew Young and she says, the whole story, and I'm scared to death. And he calls up Oprah Winfrey and said, Oprah, get her a condominium with a doorman. And she'd left for the last 2 years of her life. And I wondered what had happened to my wood carvings. If somebody isn't living in a house, and no one was, and the heat wasn't on or whatever, I mean, these woods could be ruined. I didn't know where they were for about 11 years. And then I get a phone call in May of 2017 from Skidmore College. Contact Mary Troy of the Atlanta Museum. and do it immediately. And I did. And Mary Troy said, your wood carvings are right in front of me at the Atlanta Museum. They are being archived for the National Park Service, and as well as everything else in that house. That house will be sold soon, and National Park Service is going to make it into a museum. However, we couldn't find you at first because we saw Halper as Harper, and you weren't on the internet. However, notice the middle one, there's some writing on the side. That's where I carved out R.L. Shaman Halper, my maiden name. So Shaman, they got on the computer, they got to Skidmore College, and that's how I got information. I found that sort of amazing. Well, I got in touch with the curator, and she said, we're at least 2 to 3 years behind because we can't get this house sold because Dexter King, the second son, is so angry for what was done during the Atlanta Olympics by the National Park Service, which was to move the Ebenezer Baptist Church, move the community center of the black community, that they're angry. But Andrew Young had been the mayor of Atlanta, and he called up one of his friends, and his friend bought the house and then donated it to the National Park Service. So it is still not ready. I made a promise to my husband that when it is ready, I will take the whole family down to see it. And everything has to be put back exactly the way it was when they were alive and living in the house. Okay, then, so I did many other things of the civil rights movement, many drawings also, and then I got involved with the anti-war movement. This is called Dying Warrior. It's a painting. I did several paintings of it and many drawings. If you look back in history in the Greek and Roman times, they always had a sculpture called Dying Warrior because they were always fighting and in wars. But I love this. I had a neighbor student who posed for this piece. I hope you understand it. So the next one, I ended up with getting involved with the history of Israel. And in 1966, in the 66 war, I sold all the pieces right away that I did at that time in wood. And then in 1972, 11 Israeli athletes in Munich were taken by the Palestinians out of Olympic Village, put on a plane, and slaughtered, killed. And I saw a picture in the New York Times of a young woman, probably the wife or lover of one of the guys, and the father waiting for the casket. And I looked at that and I said, well, I'd like to show Israel in mourning. It's called Grief of a Nation, with the soul of the Jewish mother and then the younger man who is rebuilding Israel. So about a year ago, I had an alarm go off in my house. It didn't sound like a smoke alarm. It was odd. So I called the fire department. In come 5 burly, strong, tall guys, go around the whole house, and they're looking for the alarm. And it turned out to be a carbon monoxide defective alarm, but thank God I didn't have any carbon monoxide in the house. And so one of them, after going around the house and seeing all my wood carvings, called the other 4 together, and they were standing in front of this piece, which is in the front hall. And he said, can you tell us the history of it? And I told him the history, and none of them had ever heard about it before. They were not Jewish. They didn't get anything from their parents or religious school about this event. And I realized at that moment, they were looking at this piece and the circumstance as history, and I was looking at it as current events. Quite a difference. I was also looking at Birmingham as current events. So the next one was the Yom Kippur War. By now, I was very interested in dance. I had started going to collect any book on dance. And when I went down to different events in New York City, you could always buy photographs of dancers there, and that's what I used for painting, for wood carving, etc. This particular one is from a book of the Maurice Béjart Ballet of Belgium. It showed the male dancer who I called Israel, the people of Israel, and she represents Israel itself. That was so full of despair that they thought they were going to lose over 250,000 Israelis in that war, because it was a surprise war on Yom Kippur. But they only lost a little over 1,000, which they considered amazing. And each of these wood carvings, this one, the one before, took 2 months for me to carve. So now I started just thinking about dance. And we'd go in for the New York City Ballet, the American Ballet Theater, the Joffrey Ballet, the Harkness Ballet, the Dance Theater of Harlem. I mean, I went in constantly, and Chuck came with me. He was interested in all of this. He was learning. And we then went to modern dance, to Alvin Ailey, to, complexions, Philobolus, and Momix. And so we saw a whole spectrum. This one is from the New York City Ballet, and it's a painting, an acrylic. It's 6 feet tall. This is a drawing of Barishnikov from one of the many photographs that I was able to purchase. Frankly, I like Barishnikov's dancing better than Nuriev's. And even though I did one small painting of Nuriev. So this is in pen and ink. I don't know if you can tell that it's in pen and ink. Okay, here's Barishnikov in acrylic. Well, he originally was nude when I made him. But there was a show at the Westport Arts Center called Some Like It Hot. So there were pictures in very hot colors, and there were pictures of beach scenes, and I did sexual hot. And I decided to give him a G-straps just to make sure I wasn't criticized too much. And then here is Alvin Ailey. If you notice, the background has a lot of motion in it and movement, because by then I was adding that to my dance paintings. In 2020, I decided to do a group of drawings that are shown in the Westport Library Artists in Residence, and I'll just show you one of the 6 drawings. This is of Alvin Ailey. I was given a photograph, and this is what I did. This is step 1. Then I began to make it more modern, and then I made it even more modern. It became another kind of a challenge for me. Whoops. Sorry about that. Oh, my life story. I have to go back. Okay, now we go. I got rid of the dancers. Now I'm only dealing with movement. This is called Concerto in G. It's about 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. And then this is another of just motion. And I continued to do that, and it became very abstract. And then Chuck had a heart attack in 1995. At this point, also, we had been to China, and I had bought Chinese brushes. But when he got sick and had to heal, I realized I had to heal too, so I went to nature. And I began to do flowers. Everyone loves flowers. And this is lilies. And this is flowers in the field in France. And these are flowers of sedum on the left and black-eyed Susan on the right that are right in front of my house. And actually, I had 2 shows of these, and I sold out of most of them. So I said, I better do another one for a little inventory. So I made another painting of flowers, and I was so bored, I said, I can't do this anymore. So I then went on to floral abstracts, meaning that I started to abstract them from flowers. This is one of them. This is bougainvillea from Oaxaca, Mexico. And what you can't see here is that I used an iridescent silver paint that looks like dew in the morning on the left-hand side. As you move across the room, it goes away. It's sort of interesting how that worked. But this is very wide. It's over 6 feet. This is floral abstract and coral. And then we get to, I did many, many of these, by the way, many floral abstracts. And then also just plain abstracts. All this time, I was also working in sculpture from the age of 50. I called up Stanley Bleifeld, I'm ready to take your course. He said, you don't need a course, you're an artist already. What you need to do is just know a few techniques, and he taught them to me. This is called ribbons. Alexander McQueen made very avant-garde clothes, and someone gave me a book on his work, and these are from dresses, but I call them dancers. So it's one of my beloved ones. I do a lot of etching on it. And here's just a simple form. I have many of these. I love working with clay. I don't make them too large because they're too heavy, but I've enjoyed the process. And then I've done a lot of life drawing of women and men. This is a wood carving that I did that's 5.5 feet tall. This is just a drawing. Another one. I have so many of these, you can't imagine. And then of men. I think these were my son's hands and knees and feet. Again, I absolutely loved doing these. And then in 2017, my husband passed away. We had known each other for 64 years. We were dating from high school on. We were 16 and 17. We grew up together. We developed our careers together. And we were always supportive of each other in every way. But he became so successful financially that he became my Medici. He supported me in the arts. And if he hadn't, I would have had to have a salary job, and I never would have had the time to develop my art as I have done. I know that as a fact. So 6 months after he passed away, I decided I was given life. My brother had died a year and 4 months before he, and honest to gosh, I was lucky. After all, I am named after a grandmother who died just after her 41st birthday. And I am so grateful to be alive. What was I going to do about it? And the answer was, I got to keep on working. I got to keep on pouring it out. There's still a lot more in. And so I did this piece. It's in the show. It had no orange originally, but in order to be in this show, I had to put little tiny pieces of dots of orange throughout it. You have to have good eyes, but you can see it when you go in there. And a friend of mine said, it looks like you're putting life on top of death. And isn't that interesting? I didn't think about it, but I guess it could certainly say that. Then in 2019, I did 11 paintings that were very colorful, and I began to use a new paint that is called interference paint. It shows up against dark. It doesn't show up much against light tones. But I was pouring out emotion, and 3 of them are in the show. Touch of Orange, and this one is called Reunion Fireworks. By the way, it was the library's greeting card this year, and they even made a bookmark of it. And this is called A Splash of Gold. And they're all 3x4. And now, I was asked by the library if I would please be one of the artists in residence. This is during COVID. And in order to do that, I had to be videoed in my house, in my studio. So my daughter did the videoing. Miggs Burrows, a graphic designer in town, did the interviewing. He's part of the art committee. And I went around my studio. I not only did the Alvin Ailey explanation that I showed you, only 1 out of 6, but at last minute, I went in to buy a 5-foot by 4-foot blank canvas. I said, I might as well start a canvas so they understand the process. And I immediately took out my Chinese brushes that I had bought in '87 that were totally destroyed thanks to my acrylic paint. They're supposed to be used only with ink. But I began to move it. So if you have an opportunity to go on YouTube and see Westport Library Artist in Residence, Roe Halper, you will see this particular painting in its very early stage. And I was explaining that half of painting is what the artist puts down on the canvas, and the other half is what the canvas tells you it needs, meaning design, color, etc. So this is one of the orange 1. This is orange 2. When I did orange 2, I realized I had made a breakthrough. I had started bringing colors that are opposites all over in the color wheel and put them all together and not worry about being near it. Like the first one showed them all in yellows, oranges, and a little bit of red. This is the third one. Again, just a touch of orange up on the top. The fourth one have bold strokes of navy blue. There's lavender in it, and of course a lot of orange. Number 5, I sold as soon as it was on the internet to a friend. And this is 6, again, bold. They're all in the other room. Number 7 was the card that many of you received. Actually, in this particular picture, you can't see the blue as vivid as you can when the light is shining on it in the other room. And the 8th one, again, I really like this one. I think that if I hadn't sold, I probably would have stopped at 7 because it can only hold 7, and I wanted to make 7 for the show, and I had sold one, so I added this one, and I'm glad I did. I also did small pieces that I have there that are sort of just matted and covered with plastic, and I took the brushes and I put them on paper, the excess paint. This is not something one should do. You should put gesso on it first. I didn't do that. And then I added the interference paints. Again, as I said, the interference paints show up under black, dark background, and they are very subtle against white background. And this one, I put the orange first, and then I added interference gray, and then a purple. These are my beloved brushes that the head of the art gallery, when she came to my studio, had to photograph them. Well, this has been the evolution, and it wouldn't have happened without a certain sense of discipline of time. I'm very good at time management, and a drive that I had inside of me. And of course, Chuck had a lot to do with it because he was there not only emotionally and supportive in every way, but financially, so I didn't have to worry about it. It's true that I've been teaching for 44 years in my studio for an after-school program for gifted high school artists, and I help them with their portfolio, but you don't make much money that way. It just about keeps you full of paint and paper and canvas. But I wanted to say that one of my students, when she went off to college, came back for a visit. And she said, "Do you think that I should be a painter when I graduate?" I said, "If you ask me the question, the answer is no. But if when you graduate, you are so driven to get what's in you out, you'll figure out a way to earn some money, but you will do it." It's the same with all of the arts, whether you compose, whether you dance, whatever it is, whether you write, if you have it in you, it's got to come out. And I remember seeing an interview of Sidney Poitier by a journalist when he was 86 years old. He had just finished writing a book. And she said, "Is this the beginning of a new career?" And his answer was, "Oh no, I had this book in me and I simply had to get it out." Well, that's the story of my life. I've had all this art in me. I simply had to get it out. Thanks.